We've got our legs all painted, and now it's time to install the leg levelers at one end and the threaded bolts at the other end. To recall, we have a leg leveler at one end, and we thread the leg leveler in. It's threaded into the inside of a T-nut that we've epoxied into a hole that we've drilled into one end of our leg. And it turns out that the outside diameter of the T-nut, the part that fits into the hole that we've drilled, is 3/8 of an inch. We have to drill the hole in the leg deep enough so that the full length of the threaded part of the leg leveler will screw completely into the leg. And in our case, the threaded part of our leg leveler is 2.5 inches, so that we need to drill our hole at least to that depth and a bit more. So now we need to install the T-nut so that we can thread our leg leveler into the leg. To glue the T-nut into the leg, we mix up a bit of epoxy. I'm using 5-minute epoxy because I find that it mixes up nice and thick, not too runny. And then I take the glue and I spread it around the outside the barrel of the T-nut. I'm trying making sure that I don't get any of that epoxy on the threads. Now that I've got the T-nut gooped up, I place the T-nut inside and I take my hammer and I tap it into place. Now the epoxy has spread out around the edge of the leg, so I just take my skewer stick here and just spread it around so that it's just catching on to each one of the edges of the T-nut. So one T-nut installed. Would you believe we have 43 more T-nuts to go? So now that we've got the T-nut epoxied into the leg, we're going to turn the leg upside down so that the T-nut is on the bottom, and we're going to let the glue dry for 24 hours. You might be tempted to just bang the T-nut into place without using any glue. I don't suggest using that. I've had the experience where the T-nut was just banged into the end of the leg, and as we were setting up modules, that T-nut decided to come loose, and we had a whole string of modules set up at that time, and it was not fun trying to get that leg leveler and the T-nut back into place. So make sure that you use epoxy glue to glue that T-nut into the end of the leg. At the other end of our leg, we have a threaded bolt that sticks out 3/4 of an inch, and this screws into the T-nut that we had previously installed into our corner gussets. That's how the leg gets fastened to the module. And our threaded bolt is actually a carriage bolt that we have cut to 2 inches long. The diameter is 5/16, which matches the thread of our T-nut in the module. And we install the threaded bolt into a hole that we've drilled into the leg. We want to screw this bolt into the wood so that it won't pull out. So we're going to do this in 2 ways. First, we're going to drill our hole 1/32 inches smaller than the 5/16 inch diameter of our bolt. That is, we're going to drill our hole 9/32, and we're going to drill our hole 1 1/4 inches deep And so this will leave 3/4 of an inch sticking out at the end, which is the amount of thread that we need to screw the leg into the gusset. Secondly, before we screw the bolt into the hole, we're going to drop a couple of gobs of epoxy glue into the hole that we've drilled. So the question now is, how are we going to turn the bolt into the hole? Well, if we take two 5/16 inch nuts and we thread them onto the end of the bolt, just remember there are two ends to the bolt. There's the end that is formed by the machine when the carriage bolt was manufactured, and the end that was cut. Our nuts go onto the formed end, and then we take two 1/2 inch wrenches and we tighten them up against each other, and now we're ready to install the threaded bolt into the end, and we can use our 1/2 inch wrench to turn it around. First, we've got to mix up some epoxy and drip it into the hole. Mixing up the epoxy, and we're just going to drop a little bit of it into the hole that we drilled. Just a couple of globs. Take our threaded bolt, insert it into the end, take one of our wrenches, press on the end, and what we start to do is we start to cut a thread in the wood of the leg. And we just keep turning it round and round and round, and as we cut the thread in the wood, our threaded bolt gets pulled in. So we keep turning and turning and turning until we have three-quarters of an inch protruding on our threaded bolt. I'm using this piece of 1x2, which is really 3/4 of an inch thick. Now that we've got the bolt in, I just take off the nuts, and there we are. Our threaded bolt has been installed. We let the epoxy dry for 24 hours, and you're going to have to use some pretty good torque to get that threaded bolt back out when the epoxy dries. But actually, we've jumped ahead of ourselves. We haven't shown you how we drill the holes in the leg, and nor have we shown you how we make the threaded bolt. So let's back up a bit. There's several ways we could make the threaded bolt that we need to screw into the T-nuts in the gussets in our modules. One of the easiest ways is to go to the hardware store and buy something called a hanger bolt. This is what it looks like. At this end, we've got a machine screw that could thread into our T-nut, and then at the other end we have a wood screw. To install the hanger bolt into the leg, we'd drill a hole about 2 to 2 1/4 inches deep with a drill bit a little smaller than 5/16 inch diameter, and then to screw the hanger bolt into the leg, we would then put 2 nuts on, tighten them one up against the other, and apply some epoxy to the hole, and then we'd crank the hanger bolt into the hole until we've only got 3/4 of an inch exposed, and that's all we need to screw the leg into the T-nut in our module frame. Another way is to take a carriage bolt. Here I have a carriage bolt that's 2.5 inches long, and unlike the usual machine bolts, the carriage bolt is threaded from the bottom to the head of the bolt, and if I measure off 2 inches of thread from the bottom, I cut off the rest, and I'll have my 2-inch threaded bolt. Now I'm going to wrap the carriage bolt in some sandpaper, because when I clamp the carriage bolt into my vise, I don't want to have the threads damaged. The sandpaper protects the thread. And then I take my hacksaw and I start cutting. So there we have our 2-inch threaded bolt. Now it's a little rough around the edges. That might give us some problems installing the threaded bolt into our 2 by 2 inch leg. So I'm going to put the threaded bolt back into the vise and do a little filing. We're going to put a little bit of a bevel on the edge that we've just finished cutting, and get rid of those ragged edges. It doesn't take a lot of filing. There, we've got one side done. We'll rotate this around a bit, and we'll do the other side. And there we go. We have a nicely finished 2-inch threaded bolt, and when we install the finished machine end, that's the part that we didn't cut, they'll go nicely into our 2 by 2 inch leg. 1 threaded bolt done, 43 more to go.